This is kind of true. I mean, we should expect nothing less coming from Obi-Wan Kenobi, but it is true that every act of biblical interpretation is true or false only relative to different sets of criteria. So, for example, a historical interpretation of a biblical passage is going to be true or false relative to historical criteria. And a literary interpretation of a passage is going to be true or false relative to literary criteria, and a theological interpretation of a passage is going to be true or false relative to theological criteria, etc., etc., etc. The problem is that many lay people, even some biblical scholars, think that biblical interpretation is only about one thing. It's only about uncovering the singular meaning of the text. It's a single operation. And as a result, they often assume that there's only a single set of criteria involved in the evaluation of any given interpretation. And because of this fundamental error, it causes a lot of lay people in particular to apply the wrong criteria to different kinds of biblical interpretation. So, for example, I made a video a little while back talking about how the Trinity isn't in the Hebrew Bible. And this disturbs some people, and it disturbs some people for exactly this reason, because they're making this mistake. They want to evaluate biblical interpretation in terms of the only criteria they know, which is a dogmatic criteria. And dogmatically, they believe the Trinity is true. And dogmatically, they believe that if theology is true, it's true because it's found in the Bible somewhere. And they take these dogmatic criteria and they apply them to what's fundamentally a historical question. It's a historical question to ask if Isaiah, for example, did Isaiah originally intend to convey some idea of a Trinity? Did Isaiah's original audience plausibly hear the idea of the Trinity in that communication? Do any of the terms in the text, can any of them plausibly relate to the Trinity? These are historical questions. They need to be evaluated in accordance with historical criteria. But because some people don't know that there are multiple sets of criteria, they try and evaluate all claims according to the same criteria, and that sort of forces all biblical interpretation to play by the rules of their own dogmatic criteria. And that's going to cause a lot of confusion. It's going to cause a lot of miscommunication. It's going to drastically reduce what a person can do in their own biblical interpretation, because it all needs to be evaluated according to the singular criteria. When you look at books on biblical interpretation published by like mainstream Bible scholars, you'll see dozens of different methods of biblical interpretation. Each are evaluated according to their own criteria: historical, literary, theological, ideological, psychological, form critical, tradition critical, redaction critical. I mean, all these different methods of biblical interpretation are evaluated according to their own criteria. And so one of the things that I try and do as a Bible educator is inform people about the diversity of different modes of biblical interpretation, and try to make sure that people's criteria matches the questions that they're actually asking of the text. Because when you can match the question and the criteria, then you're going to get a nice correspondence between, whether or not you think their interpretation is true and whether or not it really is. And without that, you're kind of stuck.